The marble floors of the Croft estate had never felt so cold. A 7 months pregnant Nora Vance, draped in black silk, walked toward the casket of her billionaire husband, Julian Croft. The air was thick with the scent of white lilies and unspoken secrets. But standing by the coffin, greeting guests as if she were the widow, was Isabella Serrano, Julian's beautiful, venomous mistress. Nora was prepared for a confrontation, for a fight over her husband's legacy. What she wasn't prepared for was the truth. The funeral was a sham. The grief was a performance, and the man she was mourning was not dead at all. The August sun beat down on the manicured lawns of the Croft estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, but inside the grand ballroom, a chilling cold had settled. It clung to the damask curtains, seeped into the immorted marble, and wrapped itself around Nora Vance's heart. At 7 months pregnant, the custom-made Chanel mourning dress felt both too tight and unnervingly hollow. A silken cage for her and her unborn child. Her husband, Julian Croft, a man whose laughter had once filled every corner of their sprawling mansion, was dead at 42. A sudden massive heart attack on his private jet, the official report said. A tragedy, an unpredictable act of God. Nora knew it was a lie. Not the death itself, the crushing finality of that felt all too real, but the narrative surrounding it. Julian, a man who had his vitals monitored by a private physician, Dr. Evelyn Reed, from Lenox Hill. More often than most people checked their email, didn't just die. But her own quiet, gnawing suspicion was nothing compared to the spectacle unfolding before her. There, standing beside the polished mahogany casket, as if she were the queen of this tragic charade, was Isabella Serrano. Her beauty was almost offensive in the face of death, raven hair cascading over one shoulder of a perfectly tailored Tom Ford dress, a single dramatic tear tracing a path down her flawless olive skin. She held a black lace handkerchief, dabbing delicately at her eyes as she accepted condolences from Julian's business partners and society friends. She was performing the role of the grieving widow with an Oscar-worthy conviction. Nora's blood ran cold, then hot. She had known about Isabella, of course. Julian hadn't been particularly discreet. Isabella was his vice president of international acquisitions, a title as transparent as the glass walls of his Manhattan office. Nora had tolerated her existence as a symptom of their world, a world of excess where powerful men collected beautiful things, and sometimes those things were people. She had believed, perhaps naively, that she and the baby represented the real anchoring part of Julian's life, the part he came home to. Now that illusion was shattered. Her best friend and lawyer, Chloe Chen, placed a steadying hand on her arm. "Ellie, don't," she whispered, her voice tight with concern. "This isn't the time or the place." But for Nora, there was no other time. She felt the fierce protective kick of her son in her womb, a stark reminder of what was at stake. This wasn't just her home. It was her child's birthright. She would not allow a mistress to usurp her place in it. She moved forward, her steps deliberate, a slow, inexorable advance across the Persian rug. The murmuring crowd parted for her, a sea of black and grey, recognizing its true queen. The sympathy in their eyes was mixed with a morbid curiosity. They could smell the impending drama. Isabella's eyes, the color of dark chocolate, flickered toward Nora. For a split second, the mask of sorrow slipped, revealing a flash of pure, unadulterated triumph. Then it was gone, replaced by a look of pained compassion. "Nora, my dear." Isabella said, her voice a velvety purr of feigned sympathy. She reached out as if to touch Nora's arm. I am so sorry. I can't imagine what you must be going through. The audacity of it stole Nora's breath. You can't imagine. Nora's voice was low, but it cut through the hushed room. What part can't you imagine, Isabella? The part where my husband is in that box, or the part where his mistress is standing here playing hostess at his funeral? A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. Isabella recoiled, clutching her chest as if wounded. How can you be so cruel? She whispered, her lower lip trembling. Julian and I, we shared something special. He loved me. He married me. Nora countered, her gaze unwavering. She stepped closer, lowering her voice so only Isabella could hear. He was having a child with me. Whatever fantasy you were living, it's over. Now I suggest you take your special memories and get the hell out of my house. Isabella's eyes narrowed. The grief vanished, completely replaced by cold, hard steel. Your house, she hissed back, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. You poor, pathetic creature. You have no idea what's really going on, do you? This house, the jet, the company, you're just a guest here. A guest whose stay has just expired. Before Nora could process the threat, a man stepped between them. It was Marcus Thorne, Julian's head of security. He was a mountain of a man, ex-Mossad, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite, and a loyalty to Julian that was absolute. Ms. Serrano, he said, his voice a low rumble. Mrs. Croft is overwrought. Perhaps some air. It wasn't a suggestion. He gently but firmly guided Isabella away from the casket. As she was led away, Isabella shot Nora a final look over her shoulder. It was a look of such potent, victorious hatred that it made Nora's skin crawl. Chloe rushed to her side. Are you okay? What did she say to you? Nora couldn't answer. Her gaze was fixed on the casket. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. It wasn't just Isabella's presence. It was something else, a detail that snagged at the edge of her consciousness. The flowers. The casket was drowning in white lilies, their cloying funereal scent filling the air. Julian had despised lilies. He was violently allergic to them. He wouldn't have wanted a single one at his own funeral. It was a small thing, a detail no one else would know or care about. But to Nora, it was a glaring mistake. A crack in the facade. Who she wondered would arrange a man's funeral and fill it with the one flower on earth he couldn't stand? Only someone who didn't really know him, or someone who knew he wouldn't be there to complain. A cold dread, far deeper and more terrifying than grief, began to seep into her bones. She looked from the lilies to the casket, then to the retreating figure of Isabella Serrano. The performance was flawless. The stage was set, but the script felt all wrong. The days following the funeral blurred into a monotonous haze of legal meetings and empty, echoing rooms. The Croft estate, once a symbol of her life with Julian, now felt like a gilded prison. Every portrait of him, every piece of art he'd acquired, seemed to mock her. Isabella Serrano had been removed from the premises by Marcus Thorne that day, but her parting words lingered in the air like a toxic perfume. You're just a guest here. Nora found herself wandering the house, touching things Julian had loved, the worn leather of his favorite Eames chair in the library, the cool marble of a sculpture he'd bought in Florence. She was searching for him, for some lingering essence that would make his death feel real. Instead, all she found were questions. The Lily incident was the first loose thread. Now she started pulling at it, and the entire tapestry of Julian's death began to unravel. Her first stop was the office of Chloe's prestigious law firm, Skadden Arps in Manhattan. Chloe had cleared her schedule, her usually immaculate office now littered with files pertaining to the Croft estate. "It's worse than we thought, Ellie," Chloe said, pushing a document across her glass desk. "This is a copy of Julian's will. It was filed by Isabella's lawyers, 2 days after his death." Nora picked it up. It was dated just 3 months prior. She scanned the dense legalese, her heart pounding with a sick rhythm. It was a complete reversal of his previous will. Nora was to receive a stipend, a generous one, to be sure, but a mere fraction of the fortune. The bulk of the estate, the company, the properties, the controlling shares was left to a charitable trust, and the sole executor and director of this trust, Isabella Serrano. "This is a forgery," Nora said, her voice flat. "Julian would never. We created his last will together after we found out I was pregnant. He wanted our son to inherit everything." "I know," Chloe said grimly. "The signature is good, Ellie. Frighteningly good. And the witnesses are 2 of Isabella's known associates. It's designed to be airtight. She's moving fast. She's already filed a motion to liquidate certain assets, citing market volatility. She's claiming it's to protect the trust's value." "She's stealing from him," Nora whispered, horrified. "From us." "We can fight it," Chloe assured her, "but a contested will can be tied up in court for years. By the time it's resolved, she could have funneled most of the liquid assets out of the country." Nora's mind raced back to the funeral, to Isabella's triumphant smirk. "You have no idea what's really going on. The plan wasn't just to replace her. It was a hostile takeover of Julian's entire life." That evening, back at the estate, Nora found herself drawn to Julian's private study. It was the one room she hadn't been able to bring herself to enter. It was his sanctuary, a place of dark wood, worn leather, and the faint scent of his cologne. Taking a deep breath, she pushed open the door. The room was exactly as he'd left it. A stack of papers on his desk, a glass with the faint residue of scotch, a half-finished game of chess on a side table. It was a perfect, heartbreaking time capsule. She ran her hand over his desk, her fingers tracing the indentations in the leather blotter. Then she saw it. Tucked beneath the blotter, almost completely hidden, was a small silver key. It wasn't a key to any door in the house. She knew them all. This was smaller, more intricate, like a key for a safe deposit box or a private diary. Beside it, almost as an afterthought, was a single folded piece of paper. A receipt. It was from a bespoke jeweler in Geneva, a place called Vacheron and Dubois, dated a week before Julian's death. It was for the repair of a pair of platinum cufflinks engraved with the Croft family crest. His favorites, the ones his father had given him. Nora froze. He was supposed to have been wearing those cufflinks when he died. The official report from the authorities in Portugal, where his plane had been diverted, had included a list of personal effects found on the body. The cufflinks were on that list. If they were being repaired in Geneva, they couldn't have been with him in Portugal. Her hands trembled as she stared at the receipt. It was a concrete piece of evidence, a lie. Small perhaps, but undeniable. If they had lied about the cufflinks, what else had they lied about? Her eyes darted around the room, searching for the lock that matched the silver key. She checked his desk drawers, the antique globe at the base of his lamp. Nothing. Then her gaze fell upon a large leather-bound volume on the bookshelf. It was a first edition of the Count of Monte Cristo Julian's favorite novel. He'd often joked that Edmond Dantes was the ultimate comeback artist. On impulse, She pulled the book from the shelf. It was surprisingly heavy. A section of the pages had been hollowed out, and nestled inside was a small steel lockbox. With a click, the silver key opened it. Inside there was no money, no secret documents. There was only a single burner cell phone, the kind used for untraceable calls, and a small leather-bound notebook. Nora's heart hammered against her ribs. She flipped open the notebook. The first few pages were filled with Julian's familiar scrawl notes on stock prices, market, projections, deal structures. But as she got further in, the entries changed. They became more frantic, more cryptic. One entry from 2 weeks ago stood out. The Leviathan deal is toxic. Complete collapse. Margin calls on everything. Can't cover. Can't let E know. Must protect her. Then another, just days before his death. Isabella has a plan. Insane. Illegal. But it might be the only way. A clean slate. Edmond Dantes. Can I trust her? Can I afford not to? Nora sank into Julian's chair, the notebook clutched in her hand. The room began to spin. Leviathan. She vaguely remembered him mentioning it, a high-risk, high-reward energy investment. A collapse. He had told her it was his greatest triumph. Another lie. And then the final chilling pieces clicked into place. The fake will. The rapid liquidation of assets. The impossible, insane plan. Edmond Dantes. The man who faked his own death to escape his enemies and reinvent himself. Julian wasn't the victim of a corporate shark. He wasn't the victim of a heart attack. He was the architect. And Isabella wasn't his mistress who got lucky. She was his co-conspirator. The grief that had suffocated her for days evaporated, replaced by a white-hot, diamond-hard rage. Her husband hadn't been taken from her. He had left her. He had chosen to abandon her and their unborn child, to erase himself from their lives as part of some despicable, cowardly scheme. She looked at the burner phone. Its screen was dark, but she knew it held the next set of answers. This was no longer about mourning a dead husband. It was about hunting a live one. The rage was a fire in her veins, burning away the fog of grief and leaving behind a clarity that was terrifying in its intensity. Julian was alive. The funeral had been the first act of a grand deception, a play designed to defraud investors, erase his debts, and leave Nora holding the bag of a ruined legacy. She immediately called Chloe. "He's alive," she said without preamble the moment her friend answered. "Ellie, what are you talking about? It's 2 a.m. The will, the cufflinks, the lilies, it was all a setup. I found his private notebook, Chloe. He was ruined. A deal went bad, and he was facing total collapse. He and Isabella cooked this up together. He faked his death." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "Are you absolutely sure?" Chloe finally asked, her voice sharp with professional focus. "I'm looking at his handwriting. He called it his Edmond Dantes plan. I also found a burner phone." "Don't touch it," Chloe commanded. "Don't turn it on. Bring everything to my office first thing in the morning. The notebook, the key, the phone. Don't tell anyone. Not the staff, not Marcus. We don't know who is loyal to Julian and who is part of this." The next morning, the city felt different. The towering skyscrapers of Manhattan no longer seemed like symbols of power and ambition, but like a concrete forest full of predators. In Chloe's office, they laid out the evidence on her desk. The forged will, the jeweler's receipt, the lockbox, the notebook, and the burner phone. "This is Monumental, Chloe breathed, staring at the items. Fraud, conspiracy, perjury. The list goes on. But proving he's alive is the key. Without that, this is just a very ugly probate dispute. So how do we prove it? Nora asked. We need someone who operates outside the normal channels, someone who can trace a ghost. Chloe tapped a few keys on her computer, then swiveled the monitor to face Nora. On the screen was a grainy photo of a man in his late 60s with a face like a weathered road map and intelligent, tired eyes. Arthur Jenkins, ex-NYPD, now a private investigator. He's old school relentless and has a reputation for finding people who don't want to be found. He's also discreet and expensive. I don't care about the cost, Nora said. Hire him. 2 hours later, Arthur Jenkins sat in Chloe's office, sipping a cup of black coffee. He listened intently as Nora recounted the story, his expression unchanging. He examined the notebook and the receipt without comment, his large, calloused fingers surprisingly gentle with the evidence. This Leviathan deal, he said. Finally, his voice a gravelly baritone. What was it? I don't know the details, Nora admitted. Julian was secretive about it. He just said it was an energy speculation in the South China Sea. And the mistress Isabella Serrano, Jenkins continued. What's her story? She appeared about a year ago. Julian hired her as a VP. He said she had incredible contacts in Asia. She's smart, speaks 4 languages. That's all I know. Jenkins grunted. People like that don't just appear. I'll start with her. People with perfect pasts are usually the ones with the most to hide. He then turned his attention to the burner phone. And this is our best bet. With a specialized kit from his briefcase, he carefully powered on the device. It was wiped clean of call logs and messages. A dead end. Of course it is, Jenkins muttered, not sounding surprised. Amateurs. He connected the phone to a small whirring machine. But they always forget the SIM card holds data ghosts. While Jenkins worked, Chloe focused on the financial front. Isabella's lawyers have petitioned the court for an expedited probate, citing the precarious financial situation of the estate. It's a bold move. She's using Julian's actual bankruptcy as a justification to seize control. So she's selling off his assets to pay the debts he was running from, Nora clarified. Worse, Chloe said. She's likely selling them to shell corporations she controls for pennies on the dollar. Then she'll have the clean assets, Julian will have his death, and his creditors get nothing. You get a pittance, and the 2 of them disappear with a laundered fortune. The sheer cold-blooded brilliance of it was staggering. A week passed. Jenkins's investigation into Isabella began to yield fruit. As he'd suspected, Isabella Serrano was a carefully constructed identity. There was no record of her before 2 years ago. Her university degrees were from obscure, now-defunct online institutions. Her previous employment history was a web of shell companies. She's a professional, Jenkins reported in their next meeting. I ran her photo through a few international databases my old buddies still give me access to. Got a hit. Her name isn't Isabella Serrano. It's Ana Costa. She's Portuguese, has a sealed juvenile record in Lisbon, and is suspected of being involved in a similar, smaller-scale scam in Brazil 5 years ago. A wealthy coffee magnate was left bankrupt after a whirlwind romance. She vanished before they could charge her. So she's a career criminal, Nora said, a knot tightening in her stomach. Julian, a man who prided himself on his ability to read people, had been played from the very beginning. Or had he? Can I trust her? Can I afford not to? His words echoed in her mind. He knew she was dangerous. He'd partnered with her anyway. The real breakthrough came from the burner phone. Jenkins's machine had managed to recover fragments of data from the SIM card. Not calls, but location pings from cell towers. For the 3 weeks before your husband's death, this phone was in constant contact with another burner, Jenkins explained, pointing to a map on a tablet. And one of them, we think this one, he tapped the screen, pinged off a tower in a very specific, very remote location, a private airstrip in the Alentejo region of Portugal, an area known for its secluded cork farms and wealthy expatriates who value their privacy. Nora stared at the map. Portugal, the country Ana Costa, aka Isabella, was from, the country where Julian's plane was diverted for his fatal heart attack. It was all connected. "He's there," Nora whispered. "He's hiding there." "It's a strong possibility," Jenkins agreed. "It's a good place to disappear. But finding one man in a whole region is a needle in a haystack." "We need more," Chloe said. "A photograph, a wire transfer, something concrete to take to the authorities. Otherwise they'll say you're a grieving, hysterical wife." Nora's mind was racing. How could they get that proof Isabella was the gatekeeper to the entire operation? They needed to get inside her world. They needed a way to see what she was doing, who she was contacting. "Her technology," Nora said, suddenly looking at Jenkins. "You got into the burner phone. Can you get into her laptop, her personal phone?" Jenkins allowed himself a small, rare smile. "Mrs. Croft," he said, "getting into her tech is the easy part. The hard part is getting close enough to do it." Nora thought of the estate of the staff who had worked for Julian for years. She thought of Marcus Thorne, the stoic head of security. His loyalty had been to Julian, but Julian was now a criminal who had betrayed everyone. Where did Marcus's loyalty lie now? He had escorted Isabella out of the funeral. He had shown deference to Nora. He was a variable, a dangerous but potentially powerful one. "I think," Nora said slowly, a plan forming in her mind. "I know someone who can get us close." The decision to approach Marcus Thorne was the biggest gamble yet. He was Julian's shadow, a man whose loyalty was legendary. If he was in on the deception, approaching him would be a fatal mistake. But if he wasn't, if his loyalty was to the legacy of the Croft family, and not the man who was currently dismantling it, he was their only way in. Nora arranged to meet him in the estate's security hub, a state-of-the-art command center, hidden behind a paneled wall in the library. It was Marcus's domain, a place of silent, blinking screens, showing every angle of the property. "Thank you for meeting me, Marcus." Nora began, her voice steady, despite the frantic beating of her heart. "Of course, Mrs. Croft," he replied, his tone formal. He stood with his arms crossed, an impassive sentinel. "I'm not going to waste your time," she said, deciding a direct approach was best. "I know Julian is alive." Marcus's expression didn't flicker. Not a muscle in his face moved, but she saw a subtle shift in his eyes, a sharpening of his focus. He didn't deny it. He waited. "I know he and Isabella, or Ana Costa, as she's also known, concocted this scheme to escape financial ruin and defraud his creditors." She continued, laying out the cards. "I know about the forged will, and I know they're liquidating everything." She paused, letting the silence hang in the air. "What I don't know, Marcus, is whether you are a part of it." He was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on a screen, showing the empty front gates. "My contract was with Mr. Julian Croft," he said finally, his voice a low rumble. "My duty was to ensure his safety and the security of his assets. What he is doing now is not security. It is demolition. He has betrayed the name he hired me to protect." Nora felt a wave of relief so profound it almost buckled her knees. Then you'll help me. What do you need? He asked, turning to face her fully. The impassive mask was gone. In its place was a look of grim determination. Arthur Jenkins, our investigator, needs access to Isabella's apartment in the city. Her laptop, her phone. We think she's communicating with Julian, arranging the final transfer of funds. We need proof. Marcus nodded slowly. She's arrogant. She thinks she's won. Her personal security is lax. She uses a commercial cleaning service for her penthouse at the Mandarin Oriental. Getting someone in won't be difficult. Getting them out again without a trace will be the challenge. The plan was set in motion with chilling efficiency. Jenkins had a contact, a former corporate espionage expert, who specialized in physical penetration. 2 days later, disguised as a member of the cleaning crew, Jenkins's operative entered Isabella's penthouse suite. Marcus, monitoring the building's security feeds from a van parked a block away, disabled the camera on her floor for a crucial 60-second window. It was the longest minute of Nora's life. Chloe and Jenkins were huddled in a temporary office they'd rented, watching a live feed from a button camera on the operative. They saw him swiftly attach a small hardware keylogger to the back of Isabella's laptop and clone the SIM card from the phone she'd left on her nightstand. Then, just as Marcus reactivated the building's camera, he was gone, pushing a cleaning cart down the hall. The data started flooding in almost immediately. "We're in," Jenkins said, his eyes glued to his screen. "She's a busy girl." What they uncovered was a masterclass in criminal conspiracy. They watched in real time as Isabella conducted a flurry of encrypted communications. She was using a sophisticated messaging app, but the keylogger captured everything before it was encrypted. She was in contact with a law firm in the Cayman Islands, finalizing the creation of a holding company named Alentejo Holdings. She was negotiating the sale of Julian's art collection through a shady auction house in Switzerland, with the proceeds to be wired directly to Alentejo Holdings. She was systematically dismantling Julian Croft's life's work. And then they found it. The needle in the haystack. It was a draft of an email saved in her personal account, addressed to a cryptic email address, Dante. return@proton.me. The email itself was brief. Subject: Final Transfer. J. The final pieces are moving. The Sotheby's wire should clear by Friday. Alentejo Holdings is operational. Once the funds are confirmed, I will initiate the final liquidation of the U.S. equities and dissolve the trust. Your legacy will be officially settled. I have booked my flight. See you Monday. A. Below the message was an attachment. It was a single, high-resolution photograph. A picture of a sprawling modern villa, built into a sun-drenched hillside, surrounded by cork trees and overlooking a sparkling blue reservoir. The file name was our.new.home.jpg. Got you, Jenkins breathed. He immediately began running a reverse image search cross-referencing the architecture with satellite imagery of the Alentejo region in Portugal. While he worked, Chloe stared at the screen, a look of horror on her face. Dissolve the trust, Ellie, if she does, that everything is gone. The money you were supposed to get, the entire estate, it will all vanish into this Cayman Islands company, and from there it can't be touched. According to this email, we have until Monday. Today was Wednesday. They had less than 12 hours. Bingo, Jenkins announced, swiveling his monitor. On the screen was a satellite view with a red circle drawn around a remote property. It was a perfect match for the villa in the photograph. It's a private estate about 20 kilometers outside of Evora, owned by a corporation registered in Panama. Completely anonymous, completely off the grid. That's where he is. Nora stared at the image of the secluded villa. The proof. It was all there. The location, the financial trail, the conspiracy. They could go to the FBI, to Interpol. They could stop the final transfer, but a cold, hard knot of fury was twisting in her gut. Julian had planned to leave her with nothing but a stipend and a lie. He had planned to abandon his own child. Going to the authorities would bring him to justice, yes, but it felt impersonal. It felt too clean. He had erased her from his life. She wanted to be the one to write herself back in. She wanted to see his face when he realized his carefully constructed new world was about to come crashing down. She wanted him to see her the pregnant wife he had discarded, standing in the ruins of his great escape. "Chloe," she said, her voice dangerously calm. "Cancel our appointment with the FBI." Chloe and Jenkins both turned to look at her. "What are you thinking, Ellie?" Chloe asked, her eyes wide with alarm. "I'm thinking a contract was broken," Nora said, her gaze meeting Marcus's in the reflection on the dark screen. "I'm thinking of my son, who deserves to inherit a name, not a scandal. And I'm thinking that some things need to be settled face to face." She looked at the image of the Portuguese villa. "Jenkins, how soon can you get me a plane?" The flight to Lisbon was a surreal experience. Nora sat in the plush leather seat of a privately chartered Gulfstream paid for, with one of the last vestiges of her own money, a trust fund her grandmother had left her. The irony was not lost on her. She was using the remnants of an old honorable family fortune to chase down a new dishonorable one. Marcus sat opposite her, silent and watchful. He had made the arrangements with an unnerving efficiency, securing the jet packing a bag with items she didn't ask about, and navigating the private terminal with the ease of a man who lived in the shadows. Jenkins had stayed behind in New York, coordinating with Chloe to put a temporary freeze on the biggest asset transfers, buying them a few precious days by filing a series of complex emergency legal injunctions. They were a flimsy dam against a financial tidal wave, but it was all they could do. The plan was simple and insane. They would land in Lisbon, drive the 2 hours to the Alentejo region, and confront Julian. What happened after that was a terrifying blank. "Are you sure about this, Mrs. Croft?" Marcus asked as they began their descent over the terracotta roofs of Lisbon. It was the first time he had shown any sign of doubt. "His note said he was doing it to protect me," Nora replied, her voice hard. "He needs to look me in the eye when he explains how abandoning his pregnant wife and stealing their child's inheritance constitutes protection. I'm not leaving Portugal until he does." Her resolve was absolute, but beneath it a current of fear ran deep. She was walking into the lion's den. Isabella Anna was a hardened criminal. And Julian, what had he become? The charming, ambitious man she had married seemed like a stranger now, a phantom from another life. The man she was going to meet was a cornered animal, a man who had faked his own death. What else was he capable of? They drove out of Lisbon in an unassuming rental car, heading east into the sun-baked plains of the Alentejo. The landscape was beautiful and stark rolling hills, covered in ancient cork oaks and olive groves. It was a land of quiet, profound history, a strange backdrop for the modern digital crime they were chasing. Using the satellite coordinates from Jenkins, they found the estate easily. It was even more isolated than it had looked in the photos. A long, unpaved road branched off the main highway, ending at a formidable modern steel gate. There were cameras visible nestled discreetly among the trees. "He hasn't forgotten his security," Marcus noted, parking the car a quarter-mile down the road, hidden by a copse of trees. "This isn't a holiday villa. It's a fortress." "Can we get in?" Nora asked. "The gate is electronic. The perimeter will be alarmed." Going over the wall is suicide, Marcus assessed calmly. We'll have to get him to open the door. He reached into his bag and pulled out the burner phone they'd found in Julian's study. It was a long shot, but it was the only one they had. The SIM card in this phone was paired with another. If he's still using that second phone, this might work. Marcus powered it on. He composed a simple text message, his thick fingers moving surprisingly fast over the tiny keypad. Compromised. Need to move now. Open the gate. He sent it. Then they waited. The silence in the car was absolute, broken only by the chirping of crickets in the dry grass. 1 minute passed, then 2. Nora held her breath. Suddenly, with a soft electronic whir, the massive steel gate began to slide open. He's home, Marcus said, starting the car and driving slowly toward the opening. The driveway snaked through a pristine, modern garden before opening up to the villa itself. It was a masterpiece of minimalist architecture, all glass and white concrete, built to merge with the hillside. It was beautiful, sterile, and completely soulless. As they pulled up to the front entrance, the door opened. A man stepped out, silhouetted against the bright interior light. He was thinner than she remembered, his hair longer, and he had a beard. But it was him. It was Julian. He was holding a phone in his hand, a look of confusion on his face. He was expecting Isabella or a trusted associate. He was not expecting to see his pregnant, supposedly grieving wife step out of a rental car in the middle of his secret Portuguese hideaway. Nora got out of the car, Marcus at her side. The world seemed to slow down. She saw the shock on Julian's face morph into disbelief, then into a pale, sickening dread. His eyes, the same eyes that had looked at her with love across 1,000 dinner tables, were now the eyes of a stranger. A ghost. Nora, he breathed, his voice hoarse. What? How? Hello, Julian. She said, her own voice sounding foreign and distant. You have no idea how many times I've imagined this moment. The part I could never quite picture, though, was the look on your face. He stared at her, then at her swollen belly, a visible testament to the life he had tried to leave behind. All the color drained from his face. The charming billionaire, the master of the universe, looked utterly pathetically lost. Before he could speak, before he could formulate a single lie, a voice cut through the air from inside the villa. Jay, who is it? Is everything all right? Isabella appeared in the doorway behind him. She was dressed in casual white linen, looking relaxed and radiant. She stopped dead when she saw Nora. The triumphant, hateful smirk from the funeral was gone, replaced by a look of pure, venomous shock. The queen of the castle had just found her fortress breached. The 2 architects of the Great Deception stood frozen on their doorstep, staring at the one person in the world they thought they would never see again. The play was over. The real world, in the form of a betrayed and furious wife, had just arrived. The silence that fell upon the pristine terrace was a physical weight. The air, thick with the scent of lavender and the dry heat of the Alentejo, crackled with unspoken accusations. For a long moment, the only sound was the drone of cicadas, indifferent witnesses to the implosion of 3 lives. Julian, Isabella, and Nora stood in a frozen tableau, a triangle of deceit and betrayal, framed by the sterile beauty of the glass and concrete villa. Julian stood as if turned to stone, his face a canvas of disbelief and dawning horror. Isabella's shock was already hardening her initial surprise, solidifying into the sharp, dangerous edges of a cornered predator. Nora, feeling the steady presence of Marcus behind her and the kick of her child within, felt a cold, unnerving calm settle over her. The grief was gone. The fear was gone. All that remained was a righteous, diamond-hard fury. It was Isabella who shattered the fragile silence, her voice a venomous hiss, directed not at Nora, but at Julian. "What is she doing here?" She spat the words, dripping with contempt. "You told me you handled everything. You told me she was a non-issue, a grieving little wife who would take her stipend and disappear." "I did," Julian stammered, his eyes darting frantically between the two women, his mind clearly struggling to catch up. He looked like a man who had woken from a dream to find himself in a nightmare. "I don't understand. This is impossible." "Oh, it's very possible, Julian," Nora said, her voice cutting through his confusion with chilling precision. She took a deliberate step forward, her gaze locked on his. "And no, you didn't handle everything. Your perfect plan had holes in it from the very beginning. You got sloppy. You underestimated me." She allowed a small, mirthless smile to touch her lips. "You started with the lilies. A small detail, I know. Filling a room with the one flower on earth you were violently allergic to. An odd choice for your own funeral, don't you think?" It made me wonder what other details you'd gotten wrong. She saw a flicker of annoyance in his eyes, the frustration of a mastermind whose cleverness was being questioned. "Then there were the cufflinks," she continued, her tone conversational, as if dissecting a flawed business plan. "Your father's cufflinks, listed on the manifest of your personal effects, found on the body in Portugal. Except they weren't in Portugal, were they? They were being repaired at Vacheron and Dubois in Geneva. I have the receipt." "This is a misunderstanding, Ellie. A series of unfortunate coincidences." He began, his old arrogance attempting to resurface to smooth over the cracks with condescending charm. "Let me explain everything. We can go inside, sit down. Explain." Nora's voice rose, the calm finally breaking to reveal the raw wound beneath. "Explain what?" "Can you explain the will, Julian? The one you signed 3 months ago, leaving your entire legacy in her hands, and your son with nothing but a glorified allowance? Or can you explain Alentejo Holdings, your new toy in the Cayman Islands, ready to swallow every last dollar from the Croft estate? And please," she took another step, her eyes burning into his, "please explain to me how faking your own death and running away with a professional con artist was somehow to protect me." Every question landed like a physical blow. He flinched, reeling from the sheer volume of information she possessed. He was exposed, stripped bare, and all he could muster was the pathetic bleating of the guilty. "You don't understand the pressure," he finally burst out, his voice cracking with a desperate, whining self-pity that turned Nora's stomach. "The Leviathan deal. It was a black hole. It wasn't just a loss, it wiped us out. Everything. I leveraged the company, our homes, our entire future on it. We were going to lose it all. The creditors would have torn me apart. I was facing lawsuits that would last decades, maybe even prison for financial misconduct. It was shame, Ellie humiliation. I couldn't let you see me like that. There was no way out. So you took the coward's way," Nora finished for him, her voice dripping with disgust. "An exit strategy built on a mountain of lies with her as your architect." She gestured contemptuously toward Isabella. "She knew a way." Julian pleaded his gaze, begging for an understanding he hadn't earned. a way to salvage something from the wreckage, a way to start over. It was for us, I swear, Ellie, it was all for us. I was going to send for you. Once the money was clear, once we were established here and the dust had settled, I was going to bring you and the baby. We could have had a life here, a good life away from all that mess. The excuse was so infantile, so utterly detached from reality, that Nora could only laugh. It was a raw, bitter, heart-breaking sound that echoed across the silent terrace. "Send for me," she repeated, her voice laced with incredulous venom. "Like a piece of luggage you'd forgotten to pack, like a pet you'd left at the kennel. You stand there in this stolen paradise, and you honestly believe I would have packed up our son and joined you, that I would have raised him in a house built on fraud, with a fortune stolen from the people you ruined. Did you ever know me at all, Julian? The woman you married, the mother of your child." It was then that Isabella, who had been watching the exchange with a cold, calculating fury, decided to reclaim the stage. She strode to Julian's side, placing a possessive hand on his chest, marking her territory. "He knew you were a liability," she said, her voice a low, scornful purr. "A sentimental fool chained to outdated concepts like honor and morality. He knew you would have dragged him down with your tears and your judgments. Powerful men making hard choices can't afford anchors, Nora. They need partners. They need someone who understands that survival is the only virtue." She looked up at Julian with a twisted, proprietary smile. "I am his partner. I saved him." "You preyed on him," Nora shot back, refusing to be cowed. "You found a weak, desperate man, and you sold him a fantasy. And by the way, Arthur Jenkins sends his regards." She paused, letting the silence stretch before delivering the killing blow. Or should I say, Anna Costa. If the previous revelations had been blows, the name was a dagger to the heart. It physically rocked Isabella. The color drained from her face, her confident posture faltered, and for the first time, raw, primal fear flashed in her eyes. "Who?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Julian stared at her, his expression a maelstrom of confusion and dawning horror. "Anna Costa. What is she talking about?" "Isabella, she's lying." "It's a trick to divide us," Isabella shrieked, her eyes blazing with a desperate fire. "Is it?" Nora pressed, relentless, now moving in for the final devastating reveal. "Is it a trick, Anna? Or should we talk about your real family? Let's talk about your father, a small-time contractor from Lisbon. A good man who had his business, his life's work, systematically crushed 30 years ago, when Croft Development, run by Julian's father, called in a small debt at a critical moment and forced him into a bankruptcy he never recovered from." Nora watched as Julian's face went from confused to horrified. He was connecting dots he never knew existed. "Your father took his own life 2 years later, didn't he, Anna?" Nora continued, her voice soft but merciless. "Leaving a teenage daughter behind with nothing but a legacy of shame and a burning, all-consuming hatred for the Croft name. This was never just about money for you, was it? It was never about saving Julian. It was about revenge. You didn't want to rescue a Croft from ruin. You wanted to orchestrate it. You wanted to destroy him from the inside out, just like his father destroyed yours." The meticulously researched story, pieced together from Jenkins' relentless digging into sealed Portuguese records, hung in the air, undeniable and catastrophic. Julian finally turned to the woman beside him, truly seeing her for the very first time. The trust in his eyes, what little he'd had left in his bankrupt world, shattered into a million irreparable pieces. "Is this true?" he whispered, his voice trembling not with rage, but with the sickening realization of his own monumental stupidity. Anna Costa let out a sharp, hysterical laugh that was utterly devoid of humor. The sophisticated mask of Isabella Serrano disintegrated completely, revealing the raw, twisted face of a woman who had been consumed by a lifelong vendetta. "True!" she screamed, the sound echoing across the hills. "Of course it's true, you pathetic fool. You Crofts with your casual cruelty and your inherited power. You walk through the world and crush people like my father, like insects under your heel, and you never, ever look back. Did I save you? Yes, I saved you from your creditors and your failures and delivered you directly into my hands. I was going to let you live here in this beautiful gilded cage, thinking you were the master while I controlled every cent, every asset. And then when the time was right, when you were completely dependent on me, I was going to strip you of the last of it and leave you with nothing but your worthless name, just like your father left us. It would have been a masterpiece." She turned her venomous, tear-filled gaze on Nora. "And you ruined it. You were supposed to be a grieving fool, a pregnant little doll, playing the part of the tragic widow. You weren't supposed to be smart." In that moment of pure, unadulterated confession, the entire pathetic truth was laid bare. Julian wasn't her partner. He was her final victim. He was a pawn in a game he didn't even know he was playing. He had traded his wife, his child, and his name for a fantasy sold to him by a woman whose only goal was his complete and utter annihilation. And then another sound joined her shrieking. A siren. It was a faint sound at first, a lonely cry, drifting over the sun-baked hills, but it was growing steadily, relentlessly louder. Marcus, standing impassively by the car, had made a call the moment Anna confessed, feeding the location to the local Polizia Giudiziaria, who were already on their way armed with a warrant and the mountain of evidence compiled by Jenkins and Chloe. Panic stark and absolute flashed across Anna's face. Her wild eyes darted from the approaching sound to the gate to Julian, to Nora. The game was over. Her life's work, her perfect revenge had crumbled to dust in a matter of minutes. She spun around and bolted back into the villa. "Don't let her get away!" Nora cried. Julian was still frozen. A statue of regret paralyzed by the sheer enormity of his folly. But Marcus was already moving, sprinting toward the house with a lethal grace and a speed that belied his size. The final chaotic act had begun. Nora Vance walked into a billionaire's funeral to mourn a husband and found a web of lies spun by a vengeful mistress. But she didn't crumble. She fought back, crossing the globe to confront the ghost of the man she married and unmask the woman who orchestrated it all. Her journey from a grieving wife to a relentless hunter proves that strength isn't about the money you have, but the truth you're willing to fight for. What would you have done in her shoes? Would you have taken the money and stayed silent, or would you have risked everything to reclaim your life? Let us know in the comments below. If you were captivated by this story of betrayal and resilience, please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who loves a good drama and subscribe for more incredible true-life tales.